We're afraid of what people will think, or we're afraid we're not good enough, or we're afraid we're too much. And so we hold ourselves back. When we do that, we're muting ourselves. And there are too many people that are muting themselves in the world. And I, for so many years, was one of them. I've discovered the power of unmuting myself, of showing up in the world in a way that is joyfully expressed and boldly alive. That's something that has been so important to me as I've discovered how freeing it is to be unmuted, to unmute our body and to unmute our ideas and to unmute our desires, to unmute ourselves in relationships and at work, and to be our own advocates and to ask for what we want and need. The unmuted life is a life that is fully alive and fully expressed and confident and clear. And to me, it's the only way that I know how to live now. I know what it's like to feel confined and stuck and small and silenced. And I also know what it feels like to be expressed and alive and joyful and present and seen. And it's so much better of a life to be unmuted. And that is what I want to bring you into. Are you ready to unmute yourself? Let's make it happen. Hey everybody, happy Unmuted Monday. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. I'm super excited about our guest today. And the cool thing about it is that you are going to get to see our very first conversation together. We've been connected on LinkedIn for some time and exchanged messages and whatnot back and forth, but we're going to have a really great conversation today that I'm excited that you're going to all get to be a part of. So feel free to drop in the comments just a hello or a hi if you're joining us. So glad. Hey there, Sue. Sue Collins here. Powerful intro. I'm glad you like the intro. That is courtesy of Daniel Hall. Daniel Hall is incredibly talented with video and with communicating messages through it. So shout out to Daniel Hall. Randy, good to have you here. Glad you like the intro. Let's see who we have. We have Laura here. Welcome, Laura. Good to have you with us today. Feel free to drop in the comments where you're joining us from. I am in Baltimore, Maryland. It's a beautiful day here. We're really enjoying fall. It's one of the most beautiful times to be here on the East Coast. And we've got, let's see, Somto is here. Gwen is here. Welcome, Gwen. Rachel, hello, fellow Rachel. I always like having a fellow Rachel joining us. So welcome. So I'm just going to kind of tee us up with a couple of announcements. And then we're going to get right into the conversation. And if there's something that you would want to ask either of us today, either Joel or me today, we will drop a link to the show in that if you want to kind of come up on stage and ask us your question, feel free. So stay tuned for that link to come in a little bit. But as we get started, I just want to share a couple of announcements and then tee us up with a question for all of you to chime in on that's going to help us kind of transition into the conversation we're going to have with our guest today. So, and welcome, Jen. Good to have you here. So something really exciting. I know many of you know that I love to sing, and then that's something that brings me great joy. And for the first time in my life, I'm actually working with a musician and a composer to write and record my first original song. So this is like an ultimate way of getting unmuted to start off, and really looking forward to that. It's nerve-wracking. You know, those things in our lives that we do where we tell ourselves a story about whether or not we can do it. It's like, well, I don't know. I'm not the kind of person that can do something like that. So I would say, you know, I don't play any instruments and I can't read music. How could I possibly write a song? And that's why we connect with and work with and collaborate with other people who have skills that maybe we don't. And so it's been really joyful, and I can't wait to share that with all of you once that is ready to go, once that's recorded. And so stay tuned for that. Super stoked about it. It's kind of leaning into the fear of the thing that you're not sure you're able to do, and then just deciding, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. A couple other things I'll mention is if you have missed any of the past episodes, we've had some incredible guests on the show. I couldn't name all of them, but we've had about almost a dozen and a half guests on the show this year. And I have on my YouTube channel, I have all the recordings of past episodes if you want to check those out. So those links are in the chat. If you want to subscribe on YouTube, I'm going to start building out my content on there. So just a heads up, if you want to hear more of these incredible conversations that we've had about how other people have unmuted themselves and stepped into that space of being more boldly alive and courageously expressed. The other thing that I'll mention before we go into our guest is I have other podcast episodes. I don't mention this very often, but on my site, I have other podcast episodes that I've been on with people talking about building confidence and courage, about unmuting yourself, advocating for yourself, about being a more intentional and courageous leader. I have all of these things on my website. And so we're going to drop a link to those podcast conversations in there too. And welcome to Domingo has joined us. We've got a LinkedIn user from, Odenton, Maryland, not too far away. That's awesome. Welcome, welcome. All right. So last thing that I'll mention here is a question that I want to invite you to reflect on. So we're going to be talking today about unmuting yourself online, unmuting your voice, your authentic voice, being willing to show up as your own personal brand, even if you work for somebody else. And that's something that I did working in corporate for 13 years before I launched my business 3 years ago. So there's a prompt that we're going to pull up on the screen and maybe drop in the chat for you to think about and respond to. So we're going to ask you to take a minute and to drop in the chat how you would finish this statement. So if you really knew me, you'd know what's something we'd know about you. Like, so I'd say if you really knew me, you would know that I married my college sweetheart. If you really knew me, you would know that I'm obsessed with peacocks and they're like, all over, they're all over my house. If you really knew me, you'd know that I love to sing, but was terrified to do it for most of my life because I was really self-conscious about performing in front of people and being judged. Or if you really knew me, you'd know I wanted to start a business 7 years before I did. So what's something about you? Just take a moment and drop in the comments. What's something about you that if we really knew you, that we'd know? Just something you'd like us to know about you. Something about yourself that you value. Maybe something you're passionate about. Let's take a moment and drop in the comments. If we really knew you, what's something that we'd know about you? We'll get to know each other a little bit here. And then I will introduce today's guest. So if you really knew me, you'd know. Oh, yes, Rachel, I remember that, meeting you in Howard County. Yeah, at an HR event. I love that community. I remember our conversation too, Rachel. All right, welcome. Nancy Deborah's here. So if we really knew you, what's something we'd know? You would know how much I love my dog. Randy loves his dog. What's your dog's name and breed? Feel free to add that information if you'd like. If you really knew me, you'd know I declared I wanted to be a coach at age 14, but I didn't become one until I was in my 30s. That's Rachel. About that. Sometimes these dreams that we have are in us from a really young age, and it takes us a while to find the courage to step forward into them. What's something we'd know about you if we knew you? So if you're joining us, you can drop in, whether you're for the live or whether you're here for the replay. We'd love to hear your response to this. You're a Gen X. John is a Gen X punk rocker, had a mohawk in high school and has no hair now. Oh, I love it. If you really knew me, Kevlin, if we really knew you, we'd know that you love empowering other women. Put that crown on, right? Gwen, that I still have so many more things I still want to do. That's amazing. Love it. Sue, if you'd really know me, you'd know that I can cry at the drop of a hat. Some happy, Yankees win, my elderly mom saying I love you to me when she was limited function. Some just thankful, seeing veterans and first responders and thanking them for their service. I love that, Sue. Nancy, if you really knew me, you'd know that I'm a crazy cat mom, radiate real, and share my story of thriving after experiencing childhood sexual abuse live on shows and on stages. I randomly speak in a New York accent, and I love ice cream. That's beautiful. I love it. Let's see. Ryan, if you really knew me, you'd know I'm passionate about servant leadership, being the future of business, politics, institutions, and culture. Ryan, so good to see you here. And Emily, you would know that I hate injustice. And it sounds like you have this activation to want to do something about it, Emily. I love that. So feel free to keep these coming. If you really know me, you'd know that Elizabeth, welcome, Beth, that I'm trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, even though I'm nearly old enough to retire. How awesome is that, right? There's a book, Beth, you might want to check out called Halftime. There's a book called Halftime that you might want to check out that might kind of give you that some insight about moving from that success to significance, or really making a choice at a certain point in your life to say, even if you feel like you're more than halfway through, to make a decision to move forward. So I love this. I'm just so excited for all of you who are here today. So feel free to keep those things coming, drop it in the comments if you want. And without further ado, what I want to do now is I want to introduce our guest. And so I know Joel Lalgee, and Joel, you can correct me if I said it wrong. I think I got it right. But Joel is a talent acquisition thought leader. He works for a company called Hire Well, and he has over 160,000 followers across social media platforms. So, I mean, wow, he totally blew up on LinkedIn in the past year. He's known for his humorous and real content, and he focuses on helping startups with their talent strategies. And he is somebody that when the laughter LinkedIn emoji character first came about, he was the first person that I thought of to comment on their page and to use it with, because he's a funny guy and he also has a lot of depth and heart to him as well. And so I'm really, really excited for all of you today to meet Joel Lalgee. So welcome, everybody. Give a warm unmuted welcome to our guest.
Yes. Great to be here. You're so good at these live shows as well, and just like interacting. I don't actually run into a lot of hosts that get so engaged with the audience. So it's awesome job there. It's really cool to be a part of this.
Oh, well, thanks. I have to say I've learned from the best: Tim Sohn, Brian Schulman, Nancy Deborah, like being on their shows as a guest frequently during the pandemic. And then I was like, maybe I should start my own show. And then Tim was like, you should. And then I kept punting when I was going to start my own show. And then we're like, January.
I love it.
So, but it's fun, as a speaker, you're kind of in this mode. Oftentimes, that's what I do full time. You're in this mode of sort of engaging with an audience and pulling things out and having a conversation. I view it, whether I'm online or in a room with people, or whether you're on a Zoom, of like, you're there to facilitate a meaningful conversation and experience, and that's what people value. People value feeling seen, and that's, if we create experiences where people feel seen because they heard their name or they heard their comment read, that's valuable to people. And I think a lot of people just miss, it might seem like a little thing, but it's not a little thing,
100%. Hi, Nancy.
Yeah, you're going to have some new friends after this show, just so you know. People here are very loyal. They always connect with the guest afterwards and start following their stuff. And it's it's very cool.
Yeah, super cool.
So I would love to, Joel, just hear a bit about your journey, even if there's things that, you can decide where you want to take this, but an area of your life where you've muted yourself at some point. And I mean, I've seen some of like the personal content related to family and things that you've shared on LinkedIn. I follow a lot of your stuff. And, you can decide where you want to go with that, but a way that you've muted yourself in your life, and a journey that you've been on to get unmuted and to, show up boldly expressed and joyfully alive. So take it away.
Yeah. It's really funny. Like when I thought about this question, and I'm totally the type of person who I don't think I naturally like unmute anything about myself. Like I'm just a very outgoing person. But obviously, like we all have things that we don't share with everybody, right? I mean, so that's like, there is part of like muting yourself, which I guess could be to do with your environments. But I'd say, like, I think for me, like a big challenge, particularly in like the corporate world that I ran into, was like, if you're actually somebody who tends to unmute yourself, like there's times where maybe you might do better on the corporate ladder if you do mute yourself. So, but I think we're in a time now where there's more people unmuting themselves, and particularly like when it comes to social media, and I think of like TikTok, such a great example. Like younger people who are coming into the workforce, they have this power now, on TikTok, where they can go viral talking about things, and it can influence. So I think for me, like that's, particularly on LinkedIn, like that is probably where I would see the most unmuting of myself online. I mean, sharing about mental health and personal stories. Like when I first started to get active on LinkedIn, that was something that that was a way that I just think originally, like my whole journey started, on social media. And I've actually changed, from that originally. Like I know originally when I started posting content, I was like, man, I want to share more about mental health and my own journey with mental struggles. And I just remember like making an impact on people. And I think over time, um, I have changed my focus, which I think can happen like when you're online and you're just sharing and you're building a brand and all these different types of things. And now I think if you looked at the content that I posted 3 years ago, for example, compared to now, the focus has completely changed. But I think that process of just, being in a workplace, and I worked remote for a long time, and, it's maybe 7 years ago I started working remotely. Um, I think like just working remotely, it's obviously great and it's convenient, but you can feel disconnected for people. So, when I did start, originally posting online, like part of it was just wanting to be connected to people in a different way, and I wasn't really on social media at all. Um, so yeah, I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, but I think for me, like just getting out there, sharing about these struggles, and I'll be open here. I haven't shared this for a while now, but basically when I was 18, I had a mental breakdown, and discovered I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and really from that point, I mean that was 15 years ago now. Really from that point, it's something that I've had to deal with and obviously like work through, and definitely not somebody who's gonna give medical advice to people, or like kind of giving, I'm here to support people, and like I love being able to support people and sharing my story about how I've overcome things. But obviously, these are real, it's a real issue that I've had to come through. And I think in corporate world, really up until I would say the last couple of years, if you talked about something like that, like, it's like people, they didn't want to talk about that. And I think that's changed with the pandemic and this remote work lifestyle that we have. But I know for me, like 3 years ago, like it's particularly on LinkedIn, like sharing a story about being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and sharing stories around that, and like I'd get a lot of comments online, but really it was like the DMs that I'd get from people were most impactful. And again, like I haven't shared this for a while, because I think like when your following gets really, really big, and you just get lots of, you reach lots of people, you start then getting like just hated on a lot as well, or like, those comments which can impact you. So I've actually strayed away from that. So I'd say like right now, like my content is probably more muted than it's ever been, really. But it's also more focused on recruiting and those types of things. So yeah, and yeah, it's a little bit about me. Hopefully, hopefully it's helpful for someone out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what you shared, it's so important to recognize that we evolve. It's this idea. I think some people have this pressure to feel like, well, I'm about this thing. And so I need to forever be about this thing. And if I ever change it all, then I'm a fraud or something like that, or I'm betraying people. And it's like, well, no, people naturally evolve, and they evolve about the things they want to talk about. And I want to appreciate and recognize your acknowledgement of the challenges you've had around mental health. And for Nancy here saying, and she openly talks about that too, for sharing your struggles, making a huge difference in people's lives. And like, even if you're not posting about it all the time, you know what I mean? Like just the fact that you're willing to talk about it or mention it, even, here in past content. But I think you're right though, especially if somebody works for somebody else, there's like this tremendous stigma of like, I burned out 5 years ago. And I remember there was somebody who was a higher up in the organization I worked at that said to somebody on our team, and I would share about it, like in like workshops I would do around beating burnout as I'm in the process of recovering myself. And the comments that I would get would be something like, she's the wellness person. I was the director of well-being. She's the wellness person. Why is she talking about burning out?
Oh my gosh.
It's like, time out. If I have a master's in health science and a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I've been in the wellness industry for like 13 years, and I'm burned out, like other people are probably struggling too. You know what I mean? Like exactly. We have to talk. We have a space, a platform, And I love what Ryan just shared too. Let me just pull that comment back up. Yeah, we grow by shining the light on the dark, not by ignoring it. And
100%.
right? I mean, that's what so much of this is about. And it's, I think people do have a perception too, if you're a funny person or if you're a positive person, that you're always that way. And it's like, no, no, like we are humans that have these complex ways of existing, you know? So I think I want to commend you for sharing what you share about your story, because I agree with you that it is important to do it, and also to give yourself permission to evolve and experiment. What I'm hearing you say too is you're experiment, you're trying different things and you're seeing what's working and what's resonating. Would you say that's part of it too?
Yeah, and I just think like, I mean, I'm actually inspired now. I mean, even just sharing that story, I'm like, man, I'm kind of getting inspired just to share more about it, because it's something which, like, I think initially on my journey, that's what it was what it was all about. It was like wanting to make an impact, and I was seeing an impact, particularly with around mental health, because I think so many people relate to struggles, but have just never really had the space to really have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, like, you don't see a lot of the stuff like necessarily on the comments of it's the DMs that you get, right? And like DMs about really, personal stories, and just like why these stories connect. But I do also think like you go through different seasons as well, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think social media to me is really unusual, because number one, it's really easy to get focused on likes, views, vanity metrics. And I'm be completely open and honest, where that's something that I think has at times kind of hampered my voice, because I've been like, you know what, I really, I start to care about how many likes I'm getting and how many comments. And I'm a normal person, right? So like if I talk to somebody online or offline, like I'm always the same person, which is where I think like there's still an authentic side to obviously like what I bring.
Mm-hmm.
But I have known at times where, like I've gotten really caught up with, is this post going to do well or isn't it? And I think everybody, I challenge anybody who says they haven't. Like, I just think it's kind of natural inclination, and that's how these social media sites kind of set it up. It's how they get people hooked in. TikTok's a great example of that. Like, I think, my sister just texted me the other day. She's like, "Oh, I just went viral on TikTok." And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what they do. Like, as you start producing content on there, you'll have like one video that goes viral, and then suddenly you want to chase that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think where I'm going with that is, I do think like your journey changes, but I think at the same time, like, that's okay. And there's different seasons. But at the end of the day, I hope that in the content that I produce, like, it does inspire people to kind of share more and open up. And I think I'm like, even just kind of going back and looking at like, where did my journey come from? I'm inspired to go back to that place as well.
Yeah.
And kind of, reignite that, because again, it's really easy to get caught up in, okay, I'm trying to grow my business, or I'm trying to, like, I'm in a real sales focused role right now. So I'm really, focused on business development, and, which is a good thing. It's good to be focused, but like, I don't want to lose the essence of where things started as well completely. And, so it's cool. I love that.
Well, to your point, it's another way to foster a meaningful connection with people, because you can get a lot of people, like you were saying earlier, we were talking into the pre-show, that it's easy you can hack an algorithm in TikTok, for instance, and be like, all right, I know if I loop this funny image enough times that a lot of people will connect and follow or like it or whatever, and it'll go viral. But it's like, what's the quality of the engagement, And so part of it is thinking through, and I just want to recognize too, we've had some new folks join us with Rich and Maria and Brian. Brian, we gave you a shout out earlier, Schulman. Hey. So
yes. What's up, Brian? Man, I don't think I've talked to Brian for a while. We've had, he was really instrumental in my journey at the beginning when I started posting content as well. And I know I remember having a conversation with Brian where he was like, I was like, how do you get back to everybody, in comments? And he just gave me some great advice. So I remember that. And I think that was about 3 years ago, which is just wild. So great to see you,
awesome.
Brian.
Yeah, Brian's a good guy. He was my very first guest on this show. I was like, I want you to be my kickoff guest.
That is awesome.
So, and he also got me to sing a lot on his show, so I got to practice that a little bit. But you're right. So Tim quoted what you put one of your quotes in here of it's good to be focused, right? But you don't want to lose the focus of where things started as well. Like to get so caught up in metrics and vanity metrics that we miss, why am I even doing this? Why am I sharing this? And what's the impact of what I'm sharing on here? And sometimes you'll share something that was just, you wrote it in 20 minutes. It was at the top of your mind, top of your heart. You didn't overthink it. And then it's like, that thing can like blow up and you didn't have any intention other than being real in the moment. Like I remember a recent post you put up about being your father-in-laws or chopping down trees, or there
Oh,
was
yeah.
something, right, that you share. I don't know if you want to touch on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, basically, like, so I had seen a post and like, I actually get like understand like what the post was saying, but it was basically about like, there's no such thing as dream jobs. And I'm not going to get into this, but I had made a comment and I said, well, obviously we know like when we're talking about a dream job, we're talking about just a job that like means a lot to somebody, right? Like I just think obvious example, like a job at Amazon, right? Like maybe you moved to the US 5 years ago and, like you come from somewhere where, your family's living in poverty and you've made it to the US. And then, to be working at a company like Amazon or Meta or, one of these big tech companies, like obviously the work isn't going to be like necessarily like dream work, but like that status, like it means a lot, right? I think hopefully people are hearing me when I say that. But then I think like I made a comment and then the kind of conversation went, well, my goal is to like never work again or like, to not have to labor. And to be honest with you, like I just think like right now, like, the idea of like not working like hard, it's like there's a lot of like obviously quiet quitting is the greatest example where like I think that term itself evokes a reaction.
Yeah.
And the people who maybe take it the wrong way are going, well, it means you just don't want to work hard. And other people saying, well, no, it just means I'm not going to work harder than I need to. I'm like, why should I? And I'm not going to get into all of that. But I think for me, like working hard and just like working with your hands, for example, is something that like I really value. And so on my vacation, it's like, what did I do? Like I like working outside and taking trees down and like working with my father-in-law and just doing these practical things, and just working hard. Like I actually think that like working hard is a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I posted about that. And to me, like there's like a spiritual side to it as well, where like I do feel like we're created to just work, and like work is a good thing, and I don't think we should lose that. But obviously like I think it's easy now to post things online and people take it the wrong way. So again, it's like that post, it got a lot of reactions, but it also got some like negative reactions in there as well. And I think that's a piece that sometimes people don't think about when they approach social media, is like everybody wants to have like that reach, but it's like the bigger your reach is, the more scrutiny you get under, and people can misread what you're saying and kind of mishear you, and they don't necessarily want to take the time to get to know you either. And that even within itself takes a toll on can take a toll on your mental health as well. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I love, I think like posts like that to me, like where you just, talking about things that are close to your heart, that's what it should all be about. Did you see that article over the weekend as well, by any chance? I think I shared it, but
I was off the grid this weekend. My family was in town. We were celebrating a birthday, so I wasn't really on LinkedIn this weekend, but I'll look for it.
Yeah. So basically, you remember the crying CEO? I'm sure you.
Yes, I remember. I
We
do. I
all
remember.
remember him.
Yeah.
So he had posted that post of, obviously of him crying, and whether or not what the intent there was, obviously you never know what someone's intent is when they post. But I kind of taken it pretty early on. I was one of the first people to comment on it, and I was kind of like, all right, man, like it's great that you're crying, but what about the people who you let go? Like I think was like the sentiment of my comment. Got a little bit sarcastic, which is how I can show up sometimes on social media. And I wake up in the morning and that comment has 1,000 likes, right? Which means, a post that gets a lot of views probably has 1,000 likes. So a comment, I was like, oh, okay, a lot of people have latched onto this. And so then I think I did a tweet about it as well, which ended up going viral on Twitter as well, which, I'm on there, not that active on there.
Mhm.
And then somebody from the New York Times reached out and they were doing a piece on like how LinkedIn has kind of shifted, right? And gone from like more like personal stories. And so I got to share, with this reporter a little bit about my journey and ended up, getting, basically like the first paragraph, she's like talking about me, which I thought was really, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess where I'm going with this is like, I think the danger with like this online vulnerability is, there's definitely people who are being vulnerable then for likes. And like for some people it's strategic and they're on their business, but for like other people, they're being really genuine and in their vulnerability. But it just creates like an unusual issue, I think, like where it's really, really, first of all, you never really know what someone's motives are when they post online, but man, it's, it can be a dangerous place when we're just like using vulnerability like for reactions and like, so
yeah.
anyway,
As the intent. I mean, like to your point, like, when people are sharing, I like to refer to it as vulnerability, like FAUX, like it's vulnerability where people are sharing these things and it's like you're doing it not because your intent is really to serve. It's like the question really at the end of the day, every time we post something is like, who are you serving by sharing this? You serving your
100%.
ego or are you serving your audience? Like, who are you serving? And sometimes there's a little of both. Like if I got an award from Forbes as a entrepreneur honoree, I'm going to share about that because that's a good, happy moment. And I think we don't celebrate ourselves enough. Totally on brand, totally aligned with like unmuting yourself and acknowledging when you've done something well and not hiding it or dismissing it or downplaying it. Right.
100%.
And at the same time, if I'm sharing, I think that's important about vulnerability is, I'm curious about your take on this, is like as a speaker, right? They tell you as a speaker, don't put something on stage you haven't worked through yourself yet. So like if you're going to be on stage doing a keynote and you're going to tell a story about something and you're going to get so caught up in the story that you get emotional and the audience is genuinely worried about you, that's not good. Like that's as a speaker, they tell you like not to do stuff like that because you don't want the audience to be concerned for you because then you're not serving them. Then it's about, they need to make sure, is the person okay? Is the person okay? And so I think what can happen online sometimes, my opinion, is that people will share things that they haven't worked through themselves yet. And they're using LinkedIn as like a therapy platform. And it's like, you might need to talk to a therapist about that. Like you can share your insights or lessons learned about it. But I think sometimes what can happen is people are going through a process of like, not having worked through a thing and having it, come off as people are like, not sure if you're okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's a tough line to navigate, and it's not to say you need to get to the other end of a thing before you can talk about it, but it's like, it's important to have gotten some help and support, like from people that know you. Cause what can happen on social media too, is like, there might be a lot of people commenting, but that person still feels totally alone. That person doesn't have tangible help yet,
Yeah. Or you can get absolutely ripped apart.
Yeah.
And I think, that is what I'm saying. Like, I think it's difficult to know what's what. And I think, if you're telling a story about here's a journey I've traveled through, and then here's what I've learned, I hope this helps you along the way, compared to here's a journey I'm going through and need help. That, and I think that's where these lines get blurred. And then you have the other side, which is like, well, hey, I'm a LinkedIn coach, and if you want to get more if you want to get more visibility, then get more vulnerable. And then then you have like the manipulation of vulnerability, for something else, which, again, I don't know, maybe this is kind of like the culture that is kind of being created in some ways, with like, obviously you talk to a lot of younger people. What do you want to be? I want to be an influencer. I want to make brand deals. I want to do this. And so I think authenticity and connecting with people, it does you well on social media. But it gets really hard then if that's like where you're getting your validation from as well. And hey, I get lots and lots of comments but it doesn't mean like I'm feeling really connected to everybody who's commenting either. It's very, it can just be, I don't know. it can be misleading, and
Yeah.
so I think like a lot of these issues, it's really I see the impact more really with like, I don't know, I guess more up and coming kind of generation, but I still think that like it's easy to get sucked into that as well, like right now. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is. So I'm with you. It's an interesting space to navigate. And I'm curious, have there been time like what caused you to first start sharing about all of this? Like I'm curious when you think about the journey that you've gone through, was there some catalyst that got you to, because I feel like whenever we have an act of courage that we display in our lives, there's often like some type of catalyst that triggered that or activated that in
Yeah.
some way. So I'm curious what that was for you.
Yeah, look, I've been off social media for a long like before the only reason I was on LinkedIn was because I'm a recruiter, and that's I had a LinkedIn recruiter license. So,
Yeah.
but after that, I went on like a 3-year kick where I was against social media, and I was like, this is just a waste of time, and like this is like, I like I watched a TED talk about it, and basically the guy said like it's a waste of time, it's just entertainment, and once you get off it, like you're freed. And like honestly, for 3 years, like I was like social media's biggest enemy. Like I would just tell everybody, like you need to be off it. Like people, how do I get invited to parties? I'm like, they text you if they really care. Like don't be ridiculous. Like if people want you there, you'll find a way. And I don't know. Like I actually got a lot of, I felt really productive and all this sort of stuff. But it was actually, funnily enough, when I look back, I'd actually gotten shoulder surgery. And so if you actually go back to like my first post, which you would never do because there's been like 2,000 since then, it would take you forever. If you go back though, you'd see like I had a shoulder surgery, and I was on like some medication for a while, and I actually started like not sleeping, and then I got really into like posting, and commenting on LinkedIn. So I was like leaving 400 or 500 comments a day, and so like I was kind of but maybe even going through like a little bit of a breakdown myself, kind of like what we're describing. And then I was like, oh, I want to share more about it. And maybe it brought up feelings of when I was 18 that maybe I'd like put down. And I started sharing about it, and and it made an impact, and I made some real connections, which then got me even more excited about it. And so that's actually kind of where things started from. And it's really interesting looking back to see that. But then I also like discovered a joy for like writing. Like I'm good at writing, like I'm good at copy, I'm good at getting attention with writing. And if you look at like how I show up on social media, I don't do as much video because I'm not necessarily great on video, and I wouldn't classify myself as like a great communicator when it comes to like speaking on video. But what I'm really good at is I'm good at writing and like really creative subject lines and really good copy in the first couple of lines. So I discovered that about myself. So I think it's kind of a weird place to start the journey, but again, like I fell in love with like the impact and the real connection that you can get with people when you are real like that. Because I do think that like it strikes people as odd, like in normal life. Like if I'm having a conversation with my neighbor and we just start talking about real things, or I share something that's a little bit less small talkish, but just there's a real conversation, that strikes people off guard nowadays, because we don't, there's a lot of people that don't, they don't want to have conversations past like what's the weather like, or like who played in sports last night. Like when you start like asking like, oh, actually, how are you doing, or like this is what I'm going through, then you're able to connect with people like that. And so I found that power that you could do that on LinkedIn. And again, I think things have kind of changed as time's gone by. But I will say, like, I don't really feel like I've ever lost like the real like who I am either through that. And I think when people see me offline, or I communicate with them offline, they're like, oh, you're the same person that I see in the comments as well, or in the DMs as well.
That matters. And we're going to come back to some of the comments. Welcome, Gabe. Shout out to Gabe, who is like one of the ultimate live streamers and supporters of humans. What's up, Gabe? We're talking.
The legend. What a legend.
We're talking about being authentic online. There's a comment Amy made I would love to get your insights on as well. And, side note, I didn't know that about you, that you basically were off of social media for like 3 years. You probably post about it. Maybe I missed it.
I don't think I have posted about that. Wow.
I'd be interested to post about that, because that surprised me, candidly, as somebody who is like as into it as you are now. I'm like, I would have never known that about you.
Yeah, my
So
wife hated it because I'd be like, "Why are you on Instagram again?" I'm like, "You're just scrolling," and she'd be like, "Shut up! You like the police?"
it's like, don't judge me.
Yeah, that's what it was like.
So Amy says, as an internal corporate recruiter, I've always be mindful of what I share, personal posts and such, as I do represent the Zoom Info brand. So I never post personal or opinion posts. Curious what, because I know obviously you're a recruiter. I'm just curious if you have any, I know she's not asking for an opinion on here, but Amy, hope you don't mind if we take this, because I'm sure you're not the only one that has a question like that. And Sue commented on it too. So curious, Joel, what your insights would be about that.
Look, yeah, I think you always have to be mindful of like your job, and I think, I've been given the freedom at the company I work for right now, Hirewell, where like if you look at the person who I was connected with first at the company, his headline is like #3 most sarcastic commenter on LinkedIn. So that should give you an indication of like I can pretty much do or say whatever I want to say, obviously within reason. Like there are certain things that like you should probably never post on LinkedIn. And hopefully we kind of all have an idea of what that would be. But I think when it comes to like, if you're an internal recruiter, I think if you're having, think about the conversations you have with a candidate. Like you'll probably share things with them, like about what you did over the weekend, or you share things about like why you want to work at Zoom Info, like what makes it a good company. I think those are the things that you could share online, and you still have like a side of it that is who you are. But I think you have to be mindful of like what's the employer branding, like how do they view it, because obviously if you're outside of like what they would want for employer branding, then that's probably not going to serve you well. But what I would say is like I think the people who have the real advantage with especially recruiters, like I think if you're at a smaller company that hasn't necessarily defined their employer brand as deeply as like maybe a company like Zoom Info or Amazon, for example, I think there's room to be yourself and kind of scale who you are as a recruiter offline, and how you interact with candidates one-on-ones, kind of scale that online. And in fact, I think it's a massive opportunity for that. And if you're having trouble like connecting with candidates that you want to connect with, I think if you actually posted more kind of authentic, less employer brand like content, you'd probably get a pretty decent influx of inbound qualified candidates as well. And in fact, I think, at Hirewell, just to give a brief example, I think we attribute 80 to 90% of our internal hires. We're hiring obviously recruiters to an agency. Most recruiters we talk to, they're like, yeah, I saw your content, or I saw James's content, I saw Hirewell's content, and it was refreshing. It was real. It was like you guys being yourselves. That's why we wanted to come work for you. And then they come and work for us, and they're like, oh, it's exactly what you said. Like no micromanagement. People treated like humans. You're treated like adult. You make, no one's riding you to make 50 phone calls a day. And so we use that. I mean, it's a superpower when it comes to attracting people that want to come and work for us at the end of the day. So I don't want to turn this into like an inbound recruiting conversation, sales pitch for Hirewell at all. But it's
it didn't come off that way, but I think you do it tactfully. You know what I mean? There's a way to share things. Like when I worked for an employee benefits consulting firm for 13 years as the director of well-being. And so I would share, for instance, an article. I started writing original like articles on LinkedIn in like 2015. And I would just share insights, like if I did a keynote around the importance of, what matters most at work to employees, I'd write an article about that. And it would be totally on brand and relevant with what my messaging was within the company. But I wasn't sharing posts about like, here's the next Affordable Care Act requirement, because people wouldn't expect me to share that, because I wasn't a benefits consultant. Like I was focused on culture and well-being. And so I probably did some things that, and that's funny, Amy. Fishbowl app.
Hey, I've showed up on some of those LinkedIn cringe pages, but not so much anymore though, because I kind of got away. Again, it's like there's definitely. I think this is what we're talking about. It's like the LinkedIn cringe, like vulnerability posts, right? Like those are what show up there, and that's not like the type of content I would encourage people to post. I think if you really are feeling compelled to share your story to help people, that's one thing. If you're like just looking for more views, when I'm talking about like the authentic content for recruiters, I'm just like, talk about your day, talk about things you care about, like why you like working there. It's like they overcomplicate. I think like companies overcomplicate that stuff. But
Yeah.
but then there is a room for like like LinkedIn articles and like long form content. Like it's no one's gonna, you're not gonna get a million views on your blog unless you're like extremely compelling or famous.
Right.
But the people who read through it, like they will probably want to work with you if it's really, really good content and they see the value in it.
Right.
So there's definitely, you should be posting stuff like that as well. But I also think there is room for like, here's my office setup and this is why it's cool, or like, this is why, like I did a post about PTO and I was like, yeah, this is how my PTO went down. I told my manager I want to take time off and they said it was great. Sure, go for it. And I was like, this is how it should be everywhere. And that post got tons of views and likes because people were like, yeah, it probably should be like that. Like, why are we overcomplicating this? And, obviously a couple people were like, well, what if you work on a team with 12 people and you got to cover shifts? And it's like, okay, obviously I know this. Sometimes it has to be a process behind it. But a lot of times it doesn't. And so I think that's the type of content I'm talking about, as opposed to the stuff that would probably end up on like a cringe site, for LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But even if you do end up on that site, like who cares? Like if you're genuinely being authentic and someone says you're being cringy, then it is what it is, right?
Right. Right. And Sue made a comment a while back where she was like, you can be authentic without bearing your soul. Like,
100%.
Tim.
100%. And I think that's the fear, right? Like I was at a wedding over the weekend, and one of I think it's like my second cousin, like he's executive, like just retired. He was in the banking industry, and he had actually pointed out this article in the New York Times. He's like, yeah, I saw your name on there. And I'm like, hey, I'm related to this guy. But we were talking about this, this whole idea of like what being authentic is. And I think he had said, like, well, I don't want to share, about my family. I'm like, okay, then don't share about your family. Like it's not like what you share, it's how you share it and the intent behind it that makes it authentic. And it's like you can fake authenticity and some people will probably buy it, but then they meet you offline and they're like, wait a minute, this isn't the same person. And then suddenly it's, the game's up, like you're not being authentic. So, and I think like Gary Vee, he's a great example of this. Like he never really talks about anything personal. Like, I mean, what do you really know about the guy? He's not but he posts so frequently about other stuff that you feel like you know him because he's just being like his authentic self online and just like a ton, but he doesn't really talk a lot about like anything personal.
Right.
So I think that's a great point that people kind of look over as well.
No, I agree. And Gabe had a question here. He said, how much do companies actually investigate a candidate's social media background when potentially hiring?
Hey, look, I think more than probably people think. I think from my recruiting standpoint, like definitely your LinkedIn profile, I'm going to take a look at. But I've definitely worked with and for me, like I maybe, I don't want to speak for all recruiters, obviously, because different recruiters are going to do different things. But for me, I would like look at your LinkedIn profile. I wasn't necessarily that concerned about the activity, but I know like hiring managers, like they'll definitely do like a Google search on you. So you do a Google search, you're going to see your LinkedIn, you're going to see your Twitter, you're going to see things that maybe you've said. So, how deep they get into that, that's really their own prerogative. I think for me, like I'm going to do a brief look at your LinkedIn profile to make sure you look, qualified for the job and that the hiring manager is going to want to chat with you. I'll look at your resume. So I personally wouldn't spend a ton of time, but for the company, it's hard to say. I think I've definitely had hiring managers come back and, screenshot things and been like, yeah, I didn't like that. And, then I try and give that feedback to the candidate. They don't like that. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Like clean up your college photos.
Funny enough, I got my MySpace on there. So I'll go look at my MySpace. I can't delete it and I'm embarrassed about it. I was 18 and I'm like, if you didn't do anything stupid in your life, congratulations. But
yeah. Oh yeah. I know there's certain things that I'm like, I mean, I feel like generally okay, but it's like, might you find a picture of me dancing on a piano at a bar when I was 21? Maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there was a dueling, piano bar we used to go to all the time.
Yeah, that video's buried on the MySpace somewhere.
But it is what it is. And Amy confirmed that. She said she checks LinkedIn profile and Google search. And there's something I thought I've been thinking about you about this, and I was going to tag you whenever I actually post it, but I figured I'd do a little preview here. I spoke at a recruiter conference National Association of Healthcare Recruiters. I keynoted their conference in Minneapolis in July.
Awesome.
And then I just spoke at the Pennsylvania State SHRM conference, and I'm going to Vermont SHRM this Thursday to keynote that conference. And one of the things that I've started to do is just to kind of affirm this experience so many recruiters are having with getting ghosted. Is I was connecting in how well I like to excuse to sing. And so I was connecting in, like, I asked the room, like, who here's been ghosted in the past like 2 months, and like everybody raises their hand because they're like, welcome to my life, And then I said, well, maybe you kind of feel maybe you kind of feel like Adele in that moment, and you kind of want to just say something like hello from the other side. I must have called 1,000 times. And like, they get to sing that, and because they're like, yes, I feel that.
You should record that, and then they can borrow that and just message every single time that does that. But then, to be fair, let's be honest here, recruiters do the same thing a lot of the time. So
I'm not responding.
But yeah, you could. I'm pretty sure you could record that, and it'd be a really creative way to get people back engaged in the process, because that's our daily lives.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll record. Well, then the other part of it, so I can record that. The other part of it I had is like asking them, have you had a purple unicorn recently, right? Where you've gotten a candidate and you're like, oh my gosh, they're all the things, and we're so excited. And then you make the offer only to find out that they've accepted another offer. And you're just devastated, right? And so in that moment, maybe you also feel like Adele and kind of feel like this, like never mind, I'll find someone like you. I wish nothing but the best for you too. But you don't really wish them the best, because you kind of wanted them to take your position.
It is so true. But you kind of do. You know what, though? You kind of do. You do want the best for some candidates, but then other times you just like, come on. Like, especially when, like, look, I recruited recruiters too the last year. And I'm not going to lie. Recruiters, because they know how to interview. They know what to say. And the one that sticks out in my mind the most was, this candidate was like, yeah, I love the job. And she told the hiring manager the same thing. Like, I love the interview. I'm definitely going to accept. And then she didn't. And so we definitely did not feel like that. So I don't know if maybe there's like a mean song you could do as well. But then that wouldn't be on brand. But I would use it.
Wouldn't be on brand. Amy says, not consider ghosting if the candidate does not respond to your in-mail, or if the recruiter does not respond to a message. Only consider ghosting if contact has taken place.
No, for sure. And I mean, I think that's the whole thing around ghosting, right? It's like, if you just apply for a company you never hear back, I mean, that's not ghosting. I mean, it's the same with sales. Like, if you email someone, they don't respond. I think, to me, like, ghosting is like if you've gone like in depth with somebody and you built that trust up, and then they don't respond.
Yeah.
Like that is, I mean, truly ghosting, and that's messed up.
Yeah.
But I again, like, I know, like, recruiters, the hard thing is on the recruiting side, it's like sometimes, like, people, because again, people talk about like, oh, I want feedback and I want all of this. But like, if you've actually ever given real feedback to somebody, look, people don't want real feedback. They want the job, and like, as much as people say they want the real feedback, it's like, I don't always buy it, because in some of the times that I've given the real feedback, like, it hasn't been responded to, or it's like, well, what about this? What about this? And it's like, look, I'm just being honest. Like, I'm not even the one who made the decision. The hiring manager was the one that made a decision. And then ultimately, I just think, like, if you got feedback like that, then that should be a sign that it's not the right place. So it's really interesting, because I think candidate experience is something which is like some companies are investing in, but I'm just like, I don't know. It's like the only time I've ever seen candidate experience truly work out is when the person's got the job. Like, other than that, like, interviewing sucks. Like, the interview process is terrible. Like, you're putting yourself out there for potential rejection. You get so excited about the job, and you're like, I want to work here, and then they reject you. How do you make that experience better? Yeah. Like, it's just rejection. It sucks, It's like, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's like, in the moment, it hurts. Down the line, you can see like the whole, the rejection was just redirection. And sometimes it is, but sometimes you really wanted the thing.
Yeah, redirection sucks.
Yeah.
in the moment. I don't know. You're
No,
right.
that's why I was like, I know you're gonna. I was like, let me throw a pithy comment at you.
No, I mean, you're right, and it's like, I think with that issue in particular, it's like someone pointed out, like, I think people's idea of what ghosting is different, and it's like their idea of like what it's like on the other side is different too. Like the last year when I was recruiting recruiters, I don't think I ever spoke to a recruiter that was like, "Oh yeah, just chilling." It was like they're always like really stressed out, working on like too much, like a lot of toxicity in cultures because it's like recruiting is a tough job. And internal recruiting compared to agency recruiting, like agency recruiting, I actually think can be in some ways a little bit easier because it's like you're just making the placements, and it's definitely a hustle and a grind, so it's not easier in that way necessarily, and you get paid on commission. But the truth of it is, it's like internal recruiting, it's like if you get a placement, which is a big deal, and it's hard to get placements, it's hard to recruit people, but if you do that, it's like, well done, you did your job. But if you don't do it, it's like, where are the candidates? Why aren't you doing it? And so it's kind of like a thankless job. And like healthcare, for example, like if you were talking to healthcare recruiters, recruiting nurses is an absolute nightmare. And like recruiting in healthcare is extremely tough, but it's also not like a super lucrative like job either, because it's like, compared to like if you were maybe if you're recruiting like physicians or doctors on like the agency side, it could be pretty lucrative. But like another good example is like, imagine if you're recruiting like truck drivers.
Yeah.
It's not super lucrative, but like if you ever try to recruit truck drivers, it's super hard. So you're like, any recruiter that I've talked to that does like high volume jobs like that, extremely challenging, super hard to reach people. You're full of rejection. And when you make a placement, it's like, great, you did your job. It's
You met the bar. You're like, okay, but it was really hard to meet the bar. Right.
Exactly. And it's like compared to like sales at most organizations, where it's like, if you do your job and you sell, you get really good commission and you get huge celebrations because everybody loves that. But like, not for recruiting. It's like, and again, agency side is a little bit different than internal, but people forget that. And they're like, oh man, these recruiters are heartless. And I'm like, nah, I've never met a heartless recruiter. Most recruiters I know are like amazing people. They're supporting their family. They're great. But it's easy for like a small part of the population, or maybe like untrained part of the population, to make mistakes, and then suddenly, we're evil.
Yeah. I know, it's like that's not the intent. It's like you can create you can be the reason why someone has the best day ever or someone has the worst day ever. Like
100%.
Which is a lot to carry. That's a big burden to carry. And it can be really hard to be in that place of rejection. I get that. Ryan said I had 4 training contacts proposed in response to requests and then ghosted. What the heck? Been there too with, somebody reached out and they're like, I want you to come speak at this thing and we're so excited about it. And then you send them the thing and then it's like crickets and you're like, oh, all right. Well, maybe you didn't really want me to speak, or maybe it's just a delay. It's like we can interpret a lack of response as a lot of different things. And in some cases, it's just been a not yet. In some cases, it's like something changed internally in the company and there's any number of reasons why a thing can happen, which is why I think maintaining curiosity is the most helpful thing. Not always the easiest, but curiosity about ourselves and toward others, I think can be really, really beneficial. But I think for anybody who knows a recruiter, anybody who's here who knows somebody who's in recruiting, like give them a hug, send them a little message, let them know it's a tough time to be in this space. Give them a high five, say like you're doing it. You may not feel like you're doing it some days, but like, it
is a tough space to be in, especially like, in like, for example, like in tech right now, there's a lot of layoffs.
Yeah.
A lot of people getting laid off. Trust me, when companies aren't recruiting, the first people to get laid off are recruiters, and maybe marketing as well, because, why would you want more sales if you're not planning to grow? But it's that kind of same idea, and it's, but to your point, like, I think approaching that with curiosity, empathy, like understanding, okay, there's a real person behind that as well is big, and just not like taking it personally as well. And it's like, again, sales is a great example of that, whereas like you can work really hard. And I'm sure you've experienced this as a business owner where like you put together a proposal, you met with them, everything seemed great. And then suddenly it is just crickets because they don't want to give you the bad news of like, hey, can't actually do this.
Yeah. It's like, I'd rather know that and then free up the emotional energy you know, my business coach refers to it as how can we reduce as much emotional labor as possible, which I really appreciate, because it's like there's emotional labor if you're waiting for a response and not hearing anything back. Because then in the back of your mind, you're like, what's happening with that? You're aware that it's still out there, you know? And yeah, I'm with you. Beth says giving the benefit of the doubt, and maintaining curiosity is a great way to approach most situations where you experience disappointment.
Yeah,
like,
very true.
touche.
Very true.
Touche, Beth. And Amy says, please, I need hugs. Here's a hug. People think my job is so easy. But yeah, not always. And especially not now. But I can't believe I like to be mindful of people's time and your time and Tim's time and everybody who's here. I can't believe we're already at the end of our time together. But is there anything, Joel, that when you think of showing up as your authentic self online, which I appreciate how you approached that today, and we got to talk about different ways of doing that, or just being vulnerable in a thoughtful way, which might sound like that's not true vulnerability. It can, yes, it still can be if it's thoughtful. Is there anything else that you'd want to leave with us? We've dropped your social links in the chat, so make sure that you follow Joel on LinkedIn if you're not already. And then also on Twitter, we dropped in, it's Human Headhunter on Twitter.
Sounds kind of cannibalistic, that, doesn't it? The Human Headhunter. Definitely not my intent there. I think like just what we talked about, it's great. And I really appreciate and just want to say thank you for having me on the show, because like I said, like even when I was sharing like how I got started, it kind of taken me back and remembered like, oh, you know, like these are things that I was really, really passionate about at the beginning. And, you know, maybe I need to kind of revisit that and start, you know, talking about some of these things as well, because there's things that I'm really passionate about in my personal life. So, and I just think like my last takeaway would just be, you know, like when we are sharing things online, just like you said, taking that step back and being like, why am I doing this? And I think obviously there's always going to be some kind of like personal intent in there, which, you know, I don't think we can get away from that. But it's like, if that's all it is, then, you know, maybe looking at like, okay, maybe I shouldn't post this. So yeah, that would be it.
Yeah, be intentional, be of service. People can tell the difference. People can feel if someone is out there just to like give themselves 55 pats on the back, or if they're doing it to genuinely help another person. So I appreciate you. I appreciate how you show up. I appreciate the number of times I've laughed in response to things you've shared, and also the, you know, thoughtful ways that you've also sparked me to have insight and to comment on your posts and let you know the things that resonate with me, or that I hope will enhance the conversation. So thanks for doing what you do. I'm glad that we finally got to connect. And everybody, I just want to say thank you to everyone who was here today. So many of you, Laura, Beth, and Amy, and Brian, and Ryan, and Tim, and Rich, and Gabe, and Nancy, and Sue, and Maria. John was here from PA Sherm. Shout out to John. But just want to thank Randy was here. Just want to thank everybody who joined us today. And just remember to be willing to step into those courageous spaces, to be yourself and share what it is that you have on your heart to share, and be mindful of the intention you have behind doing it. I'd say that would be a way we can sum up our conversation. So everybody, we will be back together in 2 weeks. Our next show is in 2 weeks. And so that will be on October 3rd. And we look forward to seeing you all back here then. So thank you again. Thank you, Joel. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Great to be here with you guys. Bye.